All right. Welcome, everyone, to the continuation of our OpenAir Expert webinar series. And today's topic is Extreme OpenAir User Interface. And for those of you who are paying attention to the date, happy St. Patrick's Day to those folks who celebrate March 17th. So what we're going to talk about today is the different ways that you can customize your OpenAir user interface. Like any system, it comes already sort of pre-configured with some standard fields and standard form layouts. But you do have a lot of flexibility in how to control that page layout. There are limitations as with any system, but there may not be as many limitations as you may think. So what we want to do is kind of introduce you to some thoughts or some tools that you could have and give you a couple examples of things that we've worked with customers that may be of interest to you, because we've found that there are ideas that come up in conversation quite often. So what we're going to highlight today are some basic things that you may know, but we're going to expand on those. So things like the custom fields in the system. If you're not aware, you can add fields almost to anything in OpenAir, and there's various types of fields that are available. But we're also going to explore form permissions, a feature that's been around for a couple of years now, but it keeps continuing to enhance, including things called form rules. And those form rules are actually becoming more and more advanced, more expanded as far as functionality. And then kind of point out some things that when you're creating custom fields you may not have been aware of, things that are like hidden divider sections, and also things like form defaults that you can set to help promote process. And if you're a subscriber to the LinkedIn OpenAir user group, you probably got our tip yesterday, which is actually related to form defaults. So if you haven't read that tip, we'll definitely be repeating it on this call. But other things to think about are how to actually make the system look very unique to different organizations within your company, to different countries or regions within your company. So all of these features can combine with the different configuration items you have in the system to give you a plethora of ways to look at forms. So let's just jump right into it. The key components for customizing your user interface start almost with custom fields. Okay? Now, custom fields are something that administrators can do, and the administrator would identify the type of field. So some things that you may already be aware of is if I come into the administration module, and for those of you who are on the account interface, the account under company, there's a custom fields area. There's plenty of fields that you can set up, and really just to highlight some that you may not be as familiar with. When you set up a custom field on the left-hand side, this is all the different things that you can put custom fields on. So it's a pretty wide, extensive list. And as you're already aware, probably the user form, the project form, the customer form, and the task form are really the popular ones in the system that get populated with lots of stuff in them. But then when you identify what form it's going to go on, then there's the type of field. So for those of you who have sort of standard out-of-the-box OpenAir systems, you may not see all of these types. There are a couple of types that are controlled by an internal switch to be able to use. And specifically those are the allocation grid, which is a field that I use to apply a percentage for probability and forecasting reporting of pipeline. And when you use an allocation grid, it automatically creates computed fields for you for reporting. And the pick list, a really nice feature that came in for those of you who have sort of and then I need to select the project owner, and then I have a drop down of all the other people in the company that I need to set as like the sales rep or the project lead or something. And for the longest time, what you would have to do for those kind of custom fields is actually make sure you kept the drop-down custom field populated with all the usernames. So it was a manual update constantly. Well, OpenAir solved that problem by actually coming up with the pick list, which is really creating a custom field that just looks at the table that it's pointing to. So you can have a pick list that just looks at the customer table, a pick list that looks at the user table. So if you have a new user and you add that user to the system, whatever field that the pick list is pointing to that table is finding that person. automatically. So if you're not seeing allocation grid and pick list, and I've described the way they work or the way they're used and they sound interesting to you, it definitely is an internal switch. Go ahead and send a ticket into OpenAir support and have that activated for your system. But okay, so the custom fields, when you add them, they show up on the form. You have some control over custom fields as far as what order they show up in, and what the names are. And for text, it's how wide it is and how many rows if it's a text area. But you don't have you have minimal control over whether it's required or not, or how it behaves on the form. When you set up a custom field, you can identify whether it's required. But on the forms themselves within OpenAir, you can use form permissions to be able to control behavior with those custom fields. So if you're not aware of that, that's definitely something you can take a look at. So let's go to the project form. It's one of, like I said, the most popular forms that people populate with customizations. And the form permissions are always down here in the tips area. If you do not see modifying form permissions, then you don't actually have the permission to be able to modify this area. But depending on how complicated your deployment is, and I've worked with quite a few of you out there that have lots and lots of different roles in the system, lots and lots of different fields, so you can imagine this is really just like a spreadsheet. Every role is on the top, every field is along the rows, so it can be quite impressive when you open it up, because the form permission can be a lot of information. I have a minimum set of roles, but you'll notice that the key to form permissions is it does actually focus on a role-based control. Okay? So right away you're probably thinking, oh, well, is this how I can control what a project manager can see versus a timesheet person or the directors in my company or the finance people in my company? And the answer is absolutely yes. Okay? In fact, you can control who can delete things and who can save things even. So although somebody may have view permission, instead of having to go and update all the different fields, say it's read-only, just say, okay, but you can't save anything. So you can change all you want, but without the save button, it's not going to impact anything. Okay. But as you go down the field settings, each row is a field that's available on the form. And what controls do you have? Well, you have controls to make it a required field. So when you're setting up the custom field, there's always an option to say make this required. At least on almost all custom fields, there's an option to say make this a required field. But what if it's only required for some people and it's not required for others? This is how you can handle that conditional requirement. By using the form permissions, you can say an administrator, it's optional, a user, it's required, a project administrator, it's optional, so forth. Okay? And those are areas that will help you sort of emphasize process, okay? Emphasize what's important and what's not important. Why would you ever make it required for some people and not required for others? A great example is you're sharing the system with a different department in your organization, like a development and services, okay? And the development team is tracking product versions, and the services team doesn't really care about those fields. Okay, so what you don't want to do is make it required universally and force someone to fill out a field that doesn't make any sense for them. Form permissions can give you that ability to make it required for the right set of people. Okay, and following along that same example, you can also use form permissions to hide fields from people that don't apply to them. Okay, a nice way to clean up the forms, especially with a standard OpenAir form and projects, lots of fields show up like workspaces perhaps, and dashboard enablement and notifications and the approval settings, and maybe that's people sometimes they just feel like they have to fill a field out if they see it, okay, whether it's important or not for them. That's what you can do is streamline that form, make it as clear-cut as possible so a field that shows up is actually something that they probably have to fill in. Use the form permissions to do that. And that usually comes with a little bit of an exercise. Print off print off the HTML page that you're looking at, kind of go through with a red marker, then come to form permissions and clean it up. Okay. I definitely see a really great use of kind of hiding stuff when it comes to things like these notifications if you're not using the notifications, because it does take up a lot of space on the form unless you remember to close it and collapse it. Okay. And then, of course, these form permissions have other controls like, well, where do the custom fields go that you created on this form? OpenAir automatically throws everything at the bottom of the form, which makes sense. It doesn't really know where to put it otherwise. But you have control over where it goes on the form. Now, what a lot of people would like is to be able to move individual fields, like systems like Salesforce can support that. OpenAir isn't quite there yet, so all the custom fields are grouped together, so they move as a block on the forms. But we'll see what turns out in the future. Okay, so that's form permissions, and that's how you can actually control what people see and what people don't see in the system. Very powerful, even though it's sort of basic with the custom fields and the form permissions, it still is a very powerful way to customize and have everyone have a unique experience in the system. Now, a recent addition in the past couple of years is something called form rules. Okay? And form rules are something on the forms that give you the ability to create conditional situations, if this equals that, okay, type things, and make something happen on the form in that case. The form rules are continually being enhanced by OpenAir, but the form rules themselves right now are, there's some limitations, like you can't hide the save or delete button, for example, based on certain conditions. But you can actually index into things like if the person's role is timesheet only, then they then hide XYZ fields, okay? Or the person's role is timesheet only, but their manager is Jody, then hide these fields. Otherwise, if they're a timesheet only person and their manager is not Jody, I can see those fields. So definitely can take you in a lot of different directions with these form rules. But the limitation of what it can do is things like make fields required, show or hide fields that are available. And you do have limitations on, forcing errors to happen. Okay, so the form rules are nice, but you can see they're basic logic, not real complicated Boolean logic type thing. And you do have to be careful that if you set up a form rule, it may actually conflict with form permissions, and OpenAir will let you know that. So it will say that it conflicts with the form permission setting. So you have to kind of toggle back and forth and see how you want to control that field. Okay, but one of the nicer things that they've done with form rules is allowed you to index into the role of the user to control what has to happen as far as these rules are concerned. So what else is on that form permission area as it relates to custom fields and customization? So there's a hidden divider section on the form permission, and that basically allows you to collapse or hide all fields related to that divider. Now, one thing to point out is when you do set up a custom field, you can actually specify whether there's a divider or not. So if we go to So if you go to the custom fields area and you create another custom field or use a custom field, part of the definition of the custom field, as you guys probably know, is being able to put a divider in text. So this now actually is a divider, and then any fields that fall under this divider until the next divider section are something that you can control visibility of the entire group of fields. You don't have to just go through and update field by field, whether it's hidden or required or anything. Okay, so that actually is a pretty powerful way to hide groups of information. A popular hidden divider section control that I see a lot of people using are hiding the attachments on a lot of forms. Before, OpenAir would have you be able to say what fields can have attachments. Now all forms have attachments. Now you have to decide whether you want to hide those attachments from certain forms. And you can do that by doing the hidden divider section. Okay? And that would prevent people from attaching stuff to your system. And form defaults. So form defaults, I think a lot of people aren't aware of form defaults. It's something that the option shows up only in a create new type of setting, and it's limited to a certain number of forms that support form defaults. But if you've never seen form defaults, specifically, form defaults are great for the project form. And in order to get to, like if you open up a project, you scroll down to the bottom of the tips area, you see the modify form permissions, but you don't see set default values. You can only see that option when you do a create. Okay, so let's say a new project. And now if I scroll down to the bottom, set form default values is available as an option. So what happens when I click on that? The set form default values comes up, and now here's an example form. It's blank. And anything I set on here, okay, and I click Save, this will actually be the default value. Okay. But another thing to point out, which is at the very top here, is you have control of the defaults by the role of the person. Okay, so think of the possibilities here. If I'm a project manager, my form defaults one way. If I'm a finance person, my form defaults a different way as I'm creating a project. Okay, so it may not be that extreme between a project person and a finance person, but let's go back to that example of if I'm in the R&D group with my special R&D fields, or I'm in the services group with my special services fields. You can see how defaulting the values differently depending on those two departments would be really nice, so that R&D doesn't have to sacrifice to what services wants and vice versa. Okay. So here you could set, say if the person is a project administrator, then my process is the project administrator must first submit the project in the qualification stage, and they are not allowed to modify this field because I'm going to use form permissions to make it read-only. So when they create a project, it defaults to qualification, and they are not allowed to change it going forward. Someone else takes control. If it's a finance person, or maybe it's like a, if it's a finance person, maybe they're allowed to create a project, but it defaults to active, because when finance gets involved, they're not going to be doing pipeline type stuff or forecasting stuff. They're always able to create stuff brand new. Okay, and then you don't want them to change it either. So things that you would want to set automatically based on who it is that's doing it can be done with form defaults. And as you go down the form here, you can see that all the drop-down fields has all the values available. Check boxes you have to indicate. You can indicate whether they're on or off. Okay. Notifications you can check box on or off. And I'll tell you, a form default that I find very helpful for consistency when creating projects is actually not on this form. Okay, this is the new project form. Okay. It is actually on the new project from another project form, which is actually a different form in OpenAir because it has that which project do I copy from option. So let's go into that example. So a new project from another project. I come down to the bottom here. Again, I get the set form default. So now as I scroll down, you'll see the unique fields that are available to this form, which are the duplication options. Okay? But how many times have you guys had people use this to copy projects, except they forget to copy the standard approvers, or they forget to copy the standard billing rules, or the whole reason that templates were set up is to drive standards and make it easy for setting up, but people forget to check these checkboxes. Okay. So what you can do is you can say you must always copy the billing rules, the recognition rules, and the project approvers. Okay. save this, then on the form permissions, hide all these fields. So really the behavior as people are creating or copying projects, they don't realize that all these pieces are coming across. They don't realize that there was something they, in the past, they would have had to do manually because the system is automatically doing it for them. So they'll just, start relying on OpenAir to do this for them automatically. Okay, so you can actually create automation to some extent by setting some of these defaults in the system. Now, those are the basic tools. The custom fields, leveraging the form permissions with rules, using those defaults that are based on roles. All of those can work together. So now it's sort of, where can your dreams take you? How can you use all these and think outside the box? So, yes, people change the project form. They always add things like contract type and project type. And on the user record, everyone's adding employee versus contractor. Those are all sort of standard customizations that I see quite often in the system. But what if you needed, and the challenges that I've seen in other companies are like the examples we talked about earlier. R&D and services are both using OpenAir, but each has their own world. And so you use form customizations to kind of make two different views of the world in one world. Okay. Same thing for international companies. They may have very unique ways that they need to enter data in the system. That's where filter sets come in. We'll have a expert series on filter sets in the future, but that controls data viewing. And you also have perhaps fields that are unique to Europe for VAT over time, that kind of thing, versus the U.S. Okay. But it's hard sometimes to think outside the box of what else could I do in OpenAir? What else could I use these forms for? Because you bought the system in terms of client, project, and user entry of time, most likely, okay, and invoicing. But what are things that sort of are related to that, And some examples that we've run into with customers are things like contract management, okay, proposal development, project status report, okay, detailed to-do lists in the system, things that yes, they can be handled through emails or they can be handled with Word documents, but it's the quintessential problem of, but it's on some server behind a VPN and I don't have permission to get to it. Okay, how can you leverage things in OpenAir to be able to do that type of out-of-the-box thinking? So let's take the example of contract management, for example. Okay, so thinking in terms of contract management, if you kind of think of it in an abstract sense, well, a contract is really just a thing you have to track, and it has a start date, an effective date, and it has an expiration date sometimes, right? And there's some information about it, like the customer, maybe the type of project it's related to. And so as you ask yourself, what are the pieces of a contract, suddenly you start realizing, well, there's sort of a parallel with the structure of OpenAir. The contract could be maybe I need a name, okay, great. I need a customer relationship, okay. That's I can do that somewhere in the system. I need a start and end date, okay. So immediately what starts coming to mind in my head is tasks. Well, what if I created a contract management system that leverages tasks as contracts, because there's quite a few contracts ideally in your world. So what would I need to track? What's the high-level information I need to track for the contract? In fact, if you wanted to scan it and attach it to a task, you could. So I actually have implemented this within my own organization, just for simple tracking of expiration dates, amendments, contract numbering sequence, whether it's a contractor or a vendor or a client. And all of this was done on the task itself. So let's take a look. So although I still have projects and my OpenAir system is still a PSA at the end of the day, I have one unique project floating around over here. And this is my contract management filing system. Okay. As I open up, you see right away it's just a list of tasks. And boy, does this just look like a list of, gobbledygook because of all the words on it, right? But let's take a look at what the task structure is all about. So if I click on this task, this is my template that I use to add another task. And as you guys may remember, when you create tasks, you have the ability, just like anything, copy and move, duplicate. So you can always create a copy of this, fill it out for the contract. So I always have a template with me. Okay, so very similar to if you're using an Excel file, right? But look at all the fields I've thrown on this task. So of course I have the ID field. That's a required field from OpenAir. And I let OpenAir do its counting. I don't necessarily use the ID field, but I could. I could use the ID field for my contract number. I've chosen not to, but you could in the future. The task milestone name, I basically want my naming convention. I'm following a naming convention. Does this mean that you always have to follow this naming convention? No, but in my system you do, because that's the way I'm looking up data. So it's the client and the project, or the agreement name. Okay, so Amazon Consulting Agreement, Master Consulting Agreement, Amazon Amendment 1, Amazon Amendment 2. Okay, and then I've actually put the contract number in here. This field must be a unique field, so I can keep track of what number I've pulled from my contract to be able to apply to the next contract that's written. What kind of contract is this? Subcontractor or a client-facing contract? And then what's the date range? Of course, the effective date of when the agreement goes in place, expiration date of when it's no longer valid. If possible, if you have a series of rates that are available, whether it's fixed fee, discount rate, standard price list, 2011, 2010, certain types of customers, to make that potentially as a reference field, so you know how many of a certain type of rate contract that you have out there. Or, of course, there's always unique rates out there. So you can put information about, this is a subcontractor with a pricing of X dollars for web development and Y dollars for technical writing. Okay. And then you could actually use the pick list custom field, if you remember back to the beginning of the presentation, to look at your contact database to find out, well, who's the contact that you're using on the contract. Because ideally that contact may also be your billing contact on the project. So just make that association inside this task. So just adding these fields to the task, this is a synopsis of my contract, and it's the information I need when I want to do reporting. Okay? Because it's the task I can attach at the very bottom of the form with the actual contract if I want an online database. But as I scroll down on the task, look, all the regular task fields are showing up. Okay? This is where I would use form permissions. I would actually use form permissions to say, when I'm in the internal stage of my projects and this is a contract management project, then hide the task assignment fields and only show contract fields. And in all the other cases, flip it, hide everything else, hide all the contract stuff and show all the task assignment stuff like normal project management. So I haven't used form permissions. It's really just myself using these contract fields, but I could very easily leave these in the system, expose them to all the people in my company, and they wouldn't see these contract details. Okay, only I would see them in the contract database. But by just filling out these few simple fields, now I actually have a pretty comprehensive database that has a list of all of my contracts. And what I've done then, took the advantage of scheduling a report that runs every week. And what it does is it keys off of the expiration date, and it says, give me everything that's expiring next month. So I have some proactive information at my fingertips to say, oh, these contracts are expiring. I should follow up with those customers. Okay? So a nice way to use the system with the fact that, just taking a different view of the data constructs can give you a lot more information and be able to use OpenAir in different ways. So here's an example of another system where we did that. What about status reports or deliverables? Okay. There's actually a part of the system, and for those of you that have talked to us over the months and years, you'll know that there's a field or a form in OpenAir on the project called Issues. Okay? It's an issue tracking system, but it's more for more static, more longer-term type issue tracking. And the functionality, since there's so many tools on the marketplace now that tie into emails, I don't see a lot of people using the issues forms as an issue tracking system because it doesn't tie directly to email at the moment. But what it is, though, is a great place to repurpose functionality in OpenAir. And I've seen it in many, many places where it's actually being repurposed to allow project managers to enter online status reports in a synopsis and track that information over time and even be able to report on it. I've worked with customers to set it up so that they're actually using it as a deliverable, like tell me how you're doing on this deliverable, or breaking those high-level tasks on the project plan down into individual activities and saying, okay, you're working on the implementation task. I'm going to make your timesheet easy. I'm going to have you only record time to the implementation task. But your job within implementation is to set up the sandbox, to load up the data the test data, and to write up the configuration document. Okay? But I don't want you to record your time down to that detailed task level. How can you solve that? Well, you can actually use the issues form as a way to say, but here's the detailed activities that relate to your implementation task. These are the detailed things I need you to do, and here's when I need you to do them by. Okay? So if you go look at, let's take a couple examples here. So on the far left, if you can see the examples on the screen, are creating a new status report. Okay? So what's on the status report? Well, of course, the synopsis is a required field, so you would put status report for XYZ date. If this is a customer-facing or an internal status report, for what period are we reporting on, what have we finished, and what's happening next. And then general drop-downs for schedule health, budget health. Is the customer happy? Are they on track? Are they holding up the project? What's the overall status of the project? Okay. So you'll notice here this doesn't have anything to do with bugs or customer sources or issues or severities. It's really just a nice, succinct informational form, and you can use internally and with the customer as a way to track status. Here's a deliverable example where the deliverable is actually tied to a specific task in the project plan. And then you can assign it to an individual person. So, Jody, you're responsible for the end user guide, okay, which is attached to the training activity, which is a pretty common setup in our world. So the deliverable state could be open, assigned, or closed, or delivered, right? And the deliverable type could be a user guide, a presentation, a data migration template, things that in our world of OpenAir we're used to seeing. But it could be anything in your world as well. And then here's another one as far as to detailed to-do lists, okay? Hey, I need you to actually set up the sandbox and I need to load test data. But that all is under UAT or implementation. So this is a detailed activity associated with a certain task. I'm assigning it to you. I expect it to take you 2 to 4 hours. And it needs to get done by next Tuesday, okay? Gives you the ability as a project manager to track whether you've asked for something to get done by next Wednesday and if it actually was done by next Wednesday. Okay. Now, an additional feature that I really like, and that's why I always kind of come back to these issues, is the fact that, as we just got done talking about as far as form defaults and hiding fields, is that using the issues form has a level of workflow attached to it automatically because the notification section of a project has notifications tied to that form automatically as standard functionality. So you can actually notify someone when they're assigned to the task. So going back to our example, if I'm telling somebody they're responsible for this deliverable, OpenAir can send them the email, hey, you've been assigned to this deliverable, okay, with these due dates, for example. The fact that there's a stage or a way to say whether it's open or closed, you can actually turn on the system, turn on notifications so that as the project manager, when one of my team members has finished their activity, I said they have to have it done by next Wednesday. They beat the clock. They finished it on Tuesday. They basically said, okay, I finished on Tuesday, closed. Okay. That closure can then send an email to the project owner so the project owner knows this is now done. Okay, and they can follow up. So leveraging these notifications in conjunction with what you're using this form for is a way that you can actually set up notifications and communication with standard functionality in OpenAir. Right? So sort of nice repurposing thoughts around this. And the last example I have to give you, this actually, people are quite creative in this area, and this is ways that you can add messages to certain forms, directions, and even links that reach out to other systems like JavaScript that do lookups, or HTML that just brings you to another web page. And these can happen in quite a few areas, like timesheets or expense reports, because at the bottom of any of the forms in those areas, there's something called customize. So let me go to like expenses, for example. So on the receipt here, if I click customize, it just comes up with a really simple box, right, with a message. And for those of you who've clicked on this, you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to type the message saying, please make sure you pick the right, that the receipt date matches the date of your receipt, your paper receipt or something like that. So you're just typing in normal messages here. But this actually is interpreted on the web page as HTML. So you can start doing HTML formatting and make it nice and bold or large or italics or flashing, whatever you want to do. But let's take it a step further. Since it's also HTML, it can handle JavaScript. Okay? And specifically, customers will actually have it reach out and call functions or reach out and call lookup things. You know? Have it look up cases in the JIRA system, which is accessible by doing a JavaScript call. Having it look up like this currency exchange activity, looking up in SharePoint where a document is so they can look it up. So you can see here that it doesn't actually have to be just a message. It can be more than a message. It can be anything that you can do with HTML and JavaScript to make it do something, to make it interact with something. Okay? And that really extends OpenAir to a much broader aspect of being able to track and keep track of information and communicate things by connecting systems together. It makes life a little bit simpler wherever possible. But, you know, although I kind of gave you lots of creative ideas, I'm sure you're starting to jot ideas down of, hey, I would really like to be able to do this and this. There are some things you can't do, okay? And the next page shows you things that you can do, so I start with the bad news first. What you can't do is have things like, let's say, percentages. You know, if they only give me information that's over 75%. Can't really do that right now. There's a limit on some of the ways that you can do some of the form rules, okay, and you may run into those. It's not completely robust. Obviously, it continues to be enhanced. You cannot, like we said, basically grab a form layout and move things around. You have to sort of go in and edit custom fields and say, no, this one should follow this. You know, this should be in order number 4, not order number 5, and it's still very manual. But ideally, you're just doing it once as part of the form configuration. Okay. The save and the delete buttons on form permissions, although you can hide those in general, you cannot hide them conditionally, which means you can't use a form rule saying if this and this and this are if these 3 fields are not filled out, hide the save form, which would be a way to sort of make sure people fill the forms out correctly or catch errors along the way. You know, if I pick the type of fruit, but then the person picked broccoli, okay, well that's That's not a consistent value. I need the type of fruit and then pick apple. Okay, I would love to be able to say that's an invalid combination of fields. You cannot save this form. You must correct this. Okay, unfortunately, that's not available quite yet. Okay. Some fancy fields like the allocation greater than multiple selection, right now they cannot be hidden or controlled with form permissions. So that's a bit of a drawback at the moment with those fields. And as you're playing around with the form permissions and the rules and whether something's required or hidden or shown or read-only, you may run into conflicts when you're using the same field and having it controlled in those two different areas, a rule handling it one way and the form permission handling it a different way. So just be aware of that. OpenAir will give you a nice red message saying, you've got a conflict with your form permission, so you may have to decide which should have master control of the field. But what you can do is, although some of the conditions don't allow you to kind of set values, you can actually make it required. Okay, so although you can't preset things for people you can't preset values conditionally, you can require them. So that's, at least that's a step forward. You can hide entire sections. You can have rule control. And even, because a lot of stuff in the system, everything's converted into a web view. Okay, when you're looking in the UI. Now, when you're printing, that's a different story. But when you're looking in the UI, for example, this health indicator, as long as this is a field that you'll always look at online, you'll never print it out or include it on stuff, go ahead and define that title with HTML. Make it color-coded so it makes more sense. It stands out more versus just the words. Okay? OpenAir will interpret all that HTML for you, so you don't have to worry too much about that. So in summary, don't feel like the system that you have has to be the same system this point forward. You can jazz it up. You can make it more aligned with your business operations, the tracking needs that you have, the conflicts between organizations or departments that need things in the system, but you're hesitant to add them because it impacts too many people. It can actually be quite flexible in those areas. The business processes, as you're going through, you're like, people always set this field wrong. When they pick this, they forget to pick that. Okay? Leverage the form permissions. Have that work for you to enhance and enforce business processes. Use those form defaults to control workflow based on who you are and what you're doing in the system. You'll be surprised at how much you will be able to clean up the data by controlling it with those standard features in the system. And just be creative. Don't feel that you have to, go find another system to do something if it's a small investment to look to see what you could repurpose and kind of be creative in OpenAir for. So before I open up the phones, for those of you who are not familiar with TopStep, we are a business efficiency solution provider for professional services or project-based organizations. And we do have a strong skill set in the OpenAir system. We have over 70 clients now, so we're expanding quite fast, quite quickly. And we are right now doing this expert webinar series every month. We've had great turnout every single time, so we're going to continue to do these. I think they've turned out to be a very valuable tool for our client base and the OpenAir community in general. We do weekly tips for OpenAir, and we just have a lot of different offerings out there that you are more than welcome to peruse by going to our website.
Hi.